Thank you all for staying. Like I said, as I promised earlier, I hope to be a little bit entertaining. Certainly interesting and engaging. We got a lot to talk about tonight. First, I'm going to do a couple of minutes or a couple of sentences at least about Flexure, who is a sponsor of this event. The original Lunar superconductor application workshop was invented as essentially a marketing tool for Flexure engineering, which at that time was predominantly cryogenic mechanical engineering. We had variously between 1 and 4 engineers working on the James Webb Space Telescope doing cryogenic test fixtures and cryogenic tests. Then the budget crunch hit, and Goddard switched from hiring consultants or contractors like us to using internal staff primarily. Then over a year or two, we lost most of our seats on James Webb, and as she mentioned now, the co-founder, or the true founder of Flexure, Greg Schustein, who was the mechanical engineer, moved on to a different job. And so now Flexure has boiled back down to essentially Pamela Clark and Abraham. And what Flexure is going to be reborn as is essentially a CubeSat company doing this kind of technical consulting. We'll be hiring more scientists, or at least using more scientists like Pamela, and we'll be using more engineers like Abraham to consult with others about building the cutting edge of CubeSats, namely lunar cubes. And as you'll see through tonight's presentation, you'll see how I plan to generate some revenue to be able to grow the team and to grow the opportunities. And the future is extraordinarily exciting and extraordinarily bright. And I hope you find this interesting. So thank you for that. And now I'm going to put on my other hat as the presenter for the Lunar Initiatives and dominantly all the workshop stuff and marketing kinds of stuff. So Bonnie and Faith would work for Select Investor. Abraham and Pamela work for Flexure Engineering. And so technically most of the Lunar Initiative activities are indeed Select Investor activities. So let me go here. So we talk about this creating a marketplace for the lunar frontier. I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that. But this is part of how the Lunar Initiatives got started. Back when I did my first startup in '82 or so, with the advent of the IBM PC, which I'll mention again in a minute, I lived here in the Bay Area, lived in Oakland, and there was the news broadcaster on KFOG had his little catchphrase was, if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. And I always liked that. And so as I just mentioned, I spent about 4 years trying to make Flexure Engineering be an engineering aerospace startup. And for a variety of reasons, we tacked back and forth. We had a couple different things. In fact, we had a spinoff that raised about $2 million and then went into the weeds and didn't come back. But so we tried a lot of different things, and I had quite a lot of success for a while. We got almost up to $1 million in revenue. Like I said, we had a spinoff that raised $2 million. So it was not a wasted 4 years, but it didn't add up to an engineering startup. And a lot of the reasons for that is the general market. What's going on in aerospace, what's going on in NASA. There's a lot of moribund stuff and not a lot of money and not a lot of creative ideas. So I decided to go out and make some of my own. And I created the Lunar Initiatives as a way of organizing where I think the planet is going, whether anyone leads or not, and I've chosen to take something of a leading role. And so the Lunar Initiatives are a series of initiatives that we'll talk about in a minute, but I want to do two kind of announcements of intermediate stages. So this is an answer to one of Bonnie's favorite questions. What did you get today that was useful? So what I ended up getting out of yesterday's end of session design challenge was I finally woke up this morning with a very clear definition of what I mean by the Lunar CubeSat standard that I hope we create over the next few years. And so I was saying the IBM PC was the first CubeSat. And if you actually look at the Pumpkin stuff, it's more or less the same kind of technology that was in the original PC. It was a well-designed empty box that you could fill with your imagination, your entrepreneurial guts, or just, down the road, another modem that was a little bit better than the last modem. But it was an open source platform. It was good, solid engineering when almost all of the computers were marginal at best. Well, the Lunar Cube standard, what I want to do, if we're able to kind of lead and then create a community to set something that looks a bit like a standard, Flexure will not be building it or being the company that does this, we'll be organizing it, is again to describe what is a well-defined box based on the current cutting edge. So iPhone Android types hardware and software. As I said earlier, it's like if we want, the lunar rover, lunar lander should be at least as smart as your Cadillac. It should be using the best that the market has to offer. And then we create software and hardware, not necessarily hard standards, but we choose some stuff that works really well, and we make it open source, and we go create an audience that wants to use that, similar to Arduino or Linux or any number of kind of ad hoc open standards that are out there these days. And then we want to create a box that you can stuff with deep space applications and aspirations. So that's what I mean when I talk about lunar cubes, and that's what I mean by the lunar cube standard, is eventually through these workshops and other activities, the SIGs in particular, get enough understanding of what that first starting point is. Because the PC, kind of like the very first Mac, but the PC in particular actually was just an empty box. It had a really simple operating system written in assembly and 7 empty slots, and that was about it. But that was enough to start the entire computer revolution because it was clear and simple, and it was backed by somebody credible like IBM. So now, the next piece of news before we get into lunar initiatives is, and this is really true, most of the stuff, a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about, not so much today, but this stuff too, is a lot of these things are really just the last few years. The new science at the moon, Bill is not with us, but LRO changed everything in 2009. When LRO got to the moon, everything we knew about the world changed as far as lunar science and planetary science is concerned. A lot of these activities are in about the same time frame. The ISS supply chain is now being fully commercialized, and CubeSats are completely welcome. So NanoRacks, Dragon, the other commercial supply systems are all going to have mechanisms for taking CubeSats along. So LEO in ISS-like orbits is going to have regular access. You buy your ticket, you fly. It's on a schedule. There's 5, 10, 15 flights a year. Whatever the number is, there's only going to be a growing capacity. What we're going to learn about tomorrow is Space Systems Loral is opening up the geosynchronous supply chain. And DSI was talking about there are others as well who are creating opportunities. Geosynchronous, again, there's 20 flights a year to geosynchronous. There's a lot of unused capacity going to geosynchronous. SSL is the first that I know that has a formal program that says they want to get either a 90-kilogram package or a 150-kilogram package geosynchronous 5 times a year. So it'll take 2 or 3 years for them to get up and running, but the idea is 3 or 4 years from now, every 2 months you can buy a slot, and that's going to happen like clockwork. That's news. That's different. This is planning. This was part of the debate of standards and standardization of hardware and software, as well as standardization of access. My thinking of as a business person, as an entrepreneur, somebody who studied how do you create a business and a profit, you need reliability. The single most important, that was what the IBM PC did to the PC market, is everybody could believe that IBM would be here 5 years from now, and so they had no problem at all buying an IBM platform, even though it was vastly simpler than actually a lot of the other platforms, if not almost all of the other platforms in a way. It had much less software and had even the Commodore 64. It was a simple, there was hundreds of applications and none for the PC. The S-ring secondaries and carriers, so we have Moog, ULA, Spaceflight are all creating planetary systems who was here earlier. We'll be back tomorrow. Lots of people are building different kinds of deployment systems that attach to ESPA rings, from simple deployment systems to carriers that can get you around cislunar space and Earth orbit in various ways. Come on. Why is this not moving? Next slide speed. There we go. So the second half of this is one of the things that we want to promote, and that Fletcher will actually go out and do. Again, we're not going to be the person who's going to design and build this thing, but I'm going to task Pamela and Abraham and Mike and a few others to sit down and put together a initial design, a preliminary design for a modular pod. So SSL calls their hole in their satellite a pod. So they have a 90-kilogram version and a 150-kilogram version. What I'm going to suggest is, again, create that kind of zeroth order outline of what a modular system would look like. So you can have a propulsion package, You can have a 3U deployer and a 6U deployer. A particular carrier would be you pick any two of those. So you pick a propulsion system and a 6U deployer, and it fits into the 150 kilogram package, and now you go to GTO. The next optimization or next idea with that is you had that modular design for multiple ways of getting different kinds of configurations in orbit, and then you create a set of, initially again, just start with these three kinds of adapters. So you can plug it into the SSL hole and fly it as an SSL pod, and that gets you to GTO or GSO. You can create an ESPA ring adapter so that you can plug it into an adapter, and then it gets launched off the adapter. Now you've got this carrier. So in the 150 kilogram version, it's pretty easy to imagine that you've got a fairly competent propulsion system and 8 6U CubeSats in it. And so SSL can put you off at GTO, and that can get to the moon. That can get to Lunar L1 pretty easily. You put on an ESPA ring, and you could again dump a similar carrier with a similar handful, 5, 10 CubeSats, various sizes, maybe 15, 3 units, depending on how you do it. And you could drop that off. In ESPA rings, you kind of go to everywhere. They go from various, there are LEO launches, and there are some that are deep space disposal orbits that get you, again, out past the moon. And some of those have as much as 500 to 1,000 pounds of unused performance. So 150 kilograms would be easy to attach to one of those if you had the lead. And then the other thing I want to do is bolt it to the astrobotic lander, which we heard about yesterday. And that gets you to either TLI, and you dump off your carrier, and then it goes from that orbit to wherever its propulsion system can take it. Or you ride along with astrobotic to that 100-kilometer lunar orbit, and then you get kicked off, and you use the propulsion system to do your orbit, perfection or plane changes, or you don't maybe you don't even need a propulsion system at all. You just unload 10 or 15 CubeSats, and they all have their own independent propulsion systems, starting from TLI or lunar orbit or some such thing. This, together with what was before, is starting now. None of this is hypothetical. All of this can be designed and could hypothetically be built with the systems. And that was, you couldn't say that 2 or 3 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago, ISS supply was beginning to open up to CubeSats. There was no path to geosynchronous, and astrobotic is still a couple of years in the future, but now that they're a Catalyst program, now that they're probably going to be the platform that Resource Prospector flies on, I suspect of the private lunar missions, astrobotic has one of the best chances. And if they fly, Moon Express is going to fly just to make sure that they don't come in second. So there's now a wide variety of destinations. And the ones we care about are the deep space destinations or the lunar destinations. But there are now multiple routine supply chains where you can just go buy a ticket, and within a month or two you know exactly when you're going to launch if you're ready. And so a lot of that uncertainty has now been removed from the system. And now somebody with one $10 million grant could build to this. If they don't know that this exists, if they don't have anything that looks like a standard, if they don't know what the deployment system is going to be, or they have to build their own deployment system after they build their experiment, they're going to take that $10 million and put it into something, not this. So this allows you now have repeatability, reliability, dependability is coming into deep space exploration in a way that has never existed before. And like I said, we're going to be instigating this, so we'll be talking about it in the SIGs, we'll be making phone calls, we'll be coordinating teams like DSI is already essentially working on a version of this, but when we'll talk about, do they want to do something like this, or do they want to do what they were doing, and how can we help, and how can we get more than one person thinking about these ideas, just as there are now several people thinking about building ESPA ring carriers. ULA has one, Mood has one, a variety of people. So now, finally, to what the title of this is, the Lunar Initiatives. So again, I decided I did not like the news that nobody was really headed towards the moon nearly as fast as I thought they should be. And so it was really clear planetary scientists need a lot of education. They're unaware of what the new technologies opportunities are. Knowledgeable people. You go to the survey event, nobody knows about the roadmap being open. I mean, they may know about a little of it, but they don't know that all of it's there, and they certainly don't see that 5 years from now, even if nobody in NASA does much of anything, there's going to be capacity for hundreds of CubeSats a year, and most of that capacity is going to go empty because nobody knows how to build those CubeSats yet. So I created the Lunar Workshops, and this year we introduced the Lunar SIGs, the Special Interest Groups. Over the summer, Abraham and I did a fair amount of work on the Lunar Challenges, which is like $1 million prize challenges, and Lunar Incubators, which is like how do you create a startup in space. We decided those two projects will be absolutely critical but require a lot more resources than we have right now, so we're going to put them on the back burner for a little while longer. We created the Lunar Artwork project, and so I hope to go work with perhaps the Robert Heinlein Foundation, has some foundation money, and find some other people to create different kinds of art competitions so that for our websites and other kinds of flyers and brochures that we want, we all have lots of really cool lunar artwork, as well as inspiring kids and readers, and for I suspect everybody in this room, it was science fiction of one form or another that got you into this business in the first place. The two new initiatives that have come up, and the three that we're going to talk about tonight, are Cubes to the Moon and Cubes to the World. Those are more or less brand new. I've been thinking about them for quite a while, but I figured out how to do them, in particular how to use them to raise a substantial amount of capital just in the last month or two. The International Lunar Geophysical Year I've been talking about for a few years, but it's only after we've kind of put the incubators on hold that it now really, I'm going back on record tonight that I'm going to make sure these things happen, because the ILGY is a very cool thing, and I'll talk about that, I think, right now. No, so we're not going to talk about it, but these are the Lunar Workshops. Lunar Cubes, which is this workshop, Lunar Science Applications, which happens in April. Right now we're switching between here and Florida, and we probably will do that for a while, but we may want to go on the road at some point and hold them not necessarily in those two locations. But Lunar Science Applications is about landers and surface science. Lunar Cubes is about cubes and predominantly orbital science. Opportunities in cislunar space. We're going to do the Sunday before DPS, which is a planetary science event, and LPSC, which is the other big 1,000-person planetary science event, and educate the planetary scientists that they should all be considering whether they want to study Jupiter or Mercury or the Moon. They should all be thinking about, how can I learn to do science and experiments in cislunar space where I can afford it as a grad student or a postdoc, and even if what I really want to do is be on a billion-dollar mission once a decade, the way you learn how to do that and qualify yourself for that is fly a whole bunch of CubeSats and prove that you're as smart as you think you are. So now let's talk about the ILGY. So this, this was just, that's what I said we're going to talk about these three things, and now let's talk about ILGY. So this was an idea that dawned on me a couple of years ago by now, is the IGY, International Geophysical Year, 1957-58, is what got all this started. That was Sputnik, that was the Van Allen belts were discovered. What came out of it was the Antarctic Treaty System, which created and preserved Antarctica for peaceful scientific use in the heart of the Cold War. Sputnik was Russian, Van Allen was U.S. Those rockets didn't land on anybody, and the scientists cooperated quite nicely in, like I said, the hottest part of the Cold War. So I thought, well, the 60th anniversary of that is 2017-18, right about the time when a lot of these missions are going to be flying. Astrobotic should be up, Moon Express should be up, all these CubeSats, there should be a handful of CubeSats going up. There's a lot of activity. And like I said, if you look at the another sort of secret, everybody knows about some of these things, but adding them all up is something that hasn't dawned on most folks. And the fact that there are 4 reasonably well-funded, almost certain to fly at least once, and most of them want to fly 2 or 3 times, lunar lander programs. So there's planetary, not planetary, but Resource Prospector, which is the NASA program. And even though that's only slated to fly once, if they're lucky, if they're successful, they're going to turn around and create the next version and fly again. But then there are 3 commercial programs, Astrobotic, Moon Express, and Maston. Those guys have no future unless they fly at least 3 times, because they all want to become permanent, flying every once a year, once every 2 years, lunar access companies. So you add all that up, that's 9, 10, 12 lunar lander missions that people are working on today with moderate to substantial financial backing that are all going to fly in the next 10 to 15 years. There's 10 lander missions in development right now over the next 10 years. That's a lot. That's a robust program. One of the things I want to do with things like the International Lunar Geophysical Year is bring that to the attention to not just the U.S. audience, but the global audience of planetary scientists and engineers who really should be building this stuff as fast as they can and learning how to do this. It's one of the, I didn't get Planet Labs to come. We're going to get several other startups on Friday, and tomorrow we're going to have one of the VC who organized Planet Labs' $54 million equity round. And Planet Labs is building this flock of doves, so they want something like 120 CubeSats in Earth orbit. They've launched something like 70 so far. And they're on, I think, version 10 or 12 of their CubeSats, and it's year 2 or 3. They basically rev the version and throw away their prototypes about every 3 to 6 months. We need that kind of op tempo. That's you know, when I watch Apple's announcements every twice a year, and I get really annoyed. We're going to the moon, and we don't have those kinds of engineers. We really should. We should have people that good. And they're around here in Silicon Valley, which is why we're here. So the ILGY now becomes actually 3 international workshops. I'd really like to run these things. They're still kind of provisional, but ultimately, if the other things I'm going to talk about tonight happen, doing this is comparatively simple. So what I'd really love to do is have the first Lunar conference, which will be more of a congress and a conference than a workshop like this. It'll probably, hopefully, be more like 300 to 500 people with the typical conference sessions and some breakout workshops. But we want to run them, the first one in Italy. If I can run the Lunar Renaissance, which is a phrase I coined, that starting in 2009, the Renaissance began. After 40 years of nobody going to the moon, there were 4 missions between 74 and 2009, and then there were about 11 or 13 different lunar missions or lunar spacecraft in that 5-year period. And then, like I said, there's going to be as many as another 5 or 10 in the next few years. So it's like after 30 years of nothing, there's something like 20 different missions in a 10 or 15-year period. And I'm calling that the Lunar Renaissance because we discovered that everything is new about the moon. So I can run a workshop in Florence, Italy on the Lunar Renaissance in 2016 when most of the Google X Prize team, they were supposed to fly in 15, so this was supposed to be a winner's lap. Instead, it will probably be right in the thick of people actually trying to fly. Either way, the Google Lunar X Prize has created a large number of people who have now at least been considering how to go to the moon. Just how do you consider building lunar rovers and lunar radios and all the kinds of stuff we've been talking about for a few days. Well, there's a couple hundred people who aren't here who've also been working on those problems in the context of the Google Lunar X Prize. I want to create these events to highlight the human capital they've created, the instruments and equipment they've created, and then the businesses that are spinning out of GLXP as well as other activities that we'll talk about. Then 2 years later, the ILGY starts. ILGY, the geophysical year is actually 18 months, like the original, and so that starts in 18. So we do a kind of a progress report. Probably hold that in some place like Seoul, South Korea, or Taiwan, or Hong Kong, depending on how much political trouble we want to get into. But somewhere in Asia, most likely. And then after the ILGY, we have a what did we get done, and herald the opening of the lunar frontier, the end of the Renaissance and the beginning of the frontier, where, just as I said, we now have regular access to cislunar space. I expect by 2020 we'll start having regular access, or credibly be talking about regular access to the lunar surface, as well as all of the rest of cislunar space. And I'm calling that the opening of the lunar frontier, when you can go out and buy a ticket and know plus or minus 1 month when you're going to fly to the moon. That's the beginning of the frontier and the end of the Wild West Renaissance period we're in right now. So that's the International Lunar Geophysical Year. It's tied together with the 3 events. If we get kind of global political recognition like the original IGY, that'd be great. But even if it's just a name we use in our workshops to describe a flurry of activity that's going to be happening in the next 3 to 5 years, that's fine with me too. So we'd like to get as much buy-in from national programs and the like, but that's not a requirement for this to be highly successful and help us weave together a global community of lunatics, as we sometimes call them. So now that's ILGY. So that's conference. That's pretty easy to understand. That's why I thought of it 2 years ago. What we're working on now, these are the two new ones, Cubes to the Moon. So about a year ago, I went to Cal Poly and saw, and then actually I guess last year at LSA, we had in Florida, as part of Kennedy's program, we had this interesting mission called, I don't know what the name of the mission is, but one half of it is called CP9, Cal Poly 9. And that's a 2U CubeSat that has the data recording and communications part in it. And then there's the StangSat, which is built by Merritt Island High School. StangSat is short for Mustang, which is their high school mascot. So the 1U StangSat is a instrument module. And so this package is intended to measure the environment of launch. They're going to be supposedly one of the first CubeSats, if not the first CubeSat, to be allowed to run during launch. And they want to measure vibration, temperature, pressure throughout launch and deployment in low Earth orbit. And they've got a ride. Kennedy's building them this fall. We're going to go in and either literally license their technologies and start where they left off, or we may pick some other things. So one of the things, this is another little project that Abraham and Pamela are going to get to work on shortly, is what does it look like if we picked up with the CubeSat standard, picked up where these guys exactly left off, and did just enough hardening to make sure that they don't fall apart on the way to the moon. The other idea as well, Arduino is a good platform that a lot of people are thinking of. There's a couple of different people who put together Arduino-based CubeSats for low Earth orbit. So we'll look at that standard and see the value of it. And then, of course, looking at the phone sat model, iPhone, Android phone sats, which is ultimately where we want to go, but is almost certainly too sophisticated for where we want to start. And by the way, we're going to nickname these guys. The communications node is Buzz, and the 1U module is Neil. And the trick is, so the first application we want to do with this is we want to go build these guys, and probably the first opportunity to really get them in use is to get them on the astrobotic lander, hopefully on the first astrobotic lander. It depends on when that is, but their schedule's slipping to the right, so now we have a couple of years and we could probably just get it done. And so very likely we could be among the first lunar cubes, and what I want to do is the communications node is bolted to the lander deck and it doesn't go anywhere, so we get to cheat. We don't have solar panels. We use the lander's comm. We use the lander's power. We use everything about the lander that we can, and then we create a modular compute node. And initially you have one, but the idea is they're modular, so you could, in a more sophisticated mission, you might plug 2 or 3 of these 2U things together and create essentially a cloud computing platform on any lander or other kinds of carrier that you want to need. And then the 1U instrumentation module, we take a little spring and we kick it off, and it lands 10 feet away. So, and these things communicate through Wi-Fi of one form or another. They also have a little laser flashing light communication system, and so we would adapt that. So they demonstrate Wi-Fi communication. They demonstrate and measure vibration, temperature, any other parameters we can think of, and then they demonstrate this modular thing so that you can imagine once you get this working and you're done with the stunt of doing it for the first time, you can imagine one of these compute nodes managing 5 or 10 little 1U modules that are mounted in various places for different kinds of instrumentation that would be valuable, whether it's more environmental modeling of measuring vibrations in 10 different locations on the lander, or it's you now put in different kinds of instrument, but they all talk back to one hub that coordinates their results, and then it does the communication with the lander and stores stuff and does other kinds of things like that. So it becomes a star network, and there are values to that. And so that becomes where we want to go with this, is it grows up into an actual distributed system with multiple 1U modules and one or more 2U nodes, depending on how much compute power and storage you need and all that kind of stuff. But again, as I said, we're gonna go out and kickstart some money, and I'll tell you how I think I can raise $1 million through Kickstarter-like campaign in a moment. But the idea is we're going to go build a flight, a flight and a spare, and that'll probably cost $250,000, $500,000 if we did it with quality parts. and I think we can raise the money to do that, and now we've got 2 to play with. We send the 1 to the moon, probably, like I said, on Astrobotics Lander because they're the most open program to work with, and so we can go farther, faster with them than the other guys who are far more secretive. Good engineering, I trust, but they're harder to work with because they're not as open. But similarly, I've talked to SSL, I've talked to Moog, and they both said, yeah, if you had a really cool little module that would measure the launch environment in the ESPA ring or in the SSL pod, then, because they want to keep their environmental data a secret for the most part. SpaceX doesn't really want to tell you what the vibration environment is on their thing unless you're actually a paying customer. Then they'll fess up, but they would rather keep that more or less secret, and most of these guys would. So if I, as a third-party customer, say, this is what I experienced, I can publish that anywhere I want to, and the manufacturers, whether it's Astrobotic, Moog, or SSL, would actually be glad that I did that for them. So those could be follow-on missions. So those are like, if we build 2, 1 and a spare, and then we decide there are people out there who would buy the data, or the launch providers would let us go for cheap, because then we publish and promote their systems, one way or the other, by hook or by crook. There's whatever that is, 5 different possible missions for this platform. So now, how do I say that I could kickstart $1 million? Well, one, there's a lot of CubeSats that have kickstarted 100,000 or more. A lot meaning 3 to 5. So coming up with $100,000 to get started isn't too hard. But what I want to do is, we have this 2U module and a 1U module. One's called Buzz and the other's called Neil, and they're going to be landing on the moon, and they may be the first U.S. lander since Apollo. What I want to do is paint the surface with 1 centimeter images, and that becomes what we sell through the Kickstarter. For $500, would you like your daughter's graduation picture to be on the moon next to Buzz? Would you like your anniversary picture, or the day you proposed to your wife, or a memorial to your father who was an aerospace engineer, to be on the moon for 1 million years on one of the first U.S. returns to the moon? So there's about 2,000 1 centimeter squares inside and out that you could hypothetically sell. And I think with 2,000 to sell, or like I said, we'll probably do it in a few phases. We'll do a founders round to get started. Then with some of that money, we can do a real, have really fancy videos and cool looking promotionals, and have other things to sell than just these little squares. But then we go around and we sell the surfaces of Buzz, and we could probably raise $250,000, $500,000 out of that. And then we raise the price again for Neil. And I think that that's very doable. Planetary Resources raised $1.5 million in less than 30 days. They're a little more organized, and they already started with more money than I have right now. So I don't think I want to try and repeat that experiment. But I think over 6 to 9 months, I could easily end up with $500,000, $1 million. And that gets us started. That gets us on to what's next. In this program, that gets us this high visibility thing. Now to actually launch it, that's a different problem. Retail price for Astrobotic is about $4 million. So we would have to do a different stunt, a different program to either convince Astrobotic to forgive us some or all of that, convince somebody else to buy the data for some or all of that. We'll probably do a little of everything, creating another event in the context of ILGY, probably a global event with the kind of different bonuses that allow us to raise the launch cost. You'll see that that's the plan with all of these things. You raise the initial money to get it out there and get it done, and then when it comes time to launch, you create a different game to raise the launch funds. And when you break it up that way, it becomes, I think, very manageable. And one of the nice things about Kickstarters is by definition, you always go into a Kickstarter saying, you may never get your bonus. We may never be able to successfully build whatever it is you're helping us build. And that's part of the culture. So what we know, however, is we'll build Buzz and Neil, we'll paint them, they'll get pictures, they'll get their certificates, they'll, the expensive ones will get a T-shirt or something else. We're going to create a lot of fun stuff around that, and then we'll go figure out how we'll actually get it to the moon, and everybody knows that's a phase 2 part of the process, but that's okay. And I think when the time comes, we'll be able to do that phase just fine. Another project, which is not necessarily a lunar cube, these will probably be LEO cubes, but another thing that I created the Lunar Initiatives to achieve was to create a global audience. I call these the international workshops for a reason. Up until I think this year, I've been saved by the Canadians. I think it was a Canadian team that came to almost all of our workshops. So I always had an international component. I think the last two we may have to stretch it unless we got a Canadian in the room. But the intent of all the workshops is to actually have a global audience, and this will help us create that for real. Again, it's happening much too slowly for me. I'm really tired of waiting for people to do this stuff, so I'm just going to go out and do it. So the idea here is you take two kits. Maybe they're, again, back to the same list. They could be pumpkin kits. They could be these new, like I said, the Arduino sats. They could be assembled or disassembled kits. But you put together a couple of CubeSat kits. We go out and license some CubeSat software and training a little bit, and then we let them participate in our special interest groups. And now we go to second-tier programs around the world, not countries that are so poor they can't handle this at all, but not countries like Germany, say, who could just buy this stuff on their own, so they don't really need our help. But I'll show you the kinds of countries I have in mind on the next slide. But the idea is we give them a couple of kits. We give them some ideas of where to start. We let them participate and support them through our special interest groups, and we probably create some special interest groups exclusively for these participants. And now this we probably would be able to raise, say, a couple of $100,000 for each group, and I have 5 in mind, so that gets you back to the $1 million or so top figure. But it's not nearly as buzzworthy, so to speak, as the Lunar mission. But I think, again, when we play this out, I think we can easily get a lot of support for this. And so the 5 that popped into my mind is 5. You do them in groups. So the first one that I thought of was the Spanish-speaking world, because the trick here is you go find a good university in Spain. Spain's relatively sophisticated, so maybe not their top aerospace university, but maybe their second or third aerospace university. Similar with Chile. Chile's got a really great program. So we pick a program, whether it's a university program or some sort of commercial aerospace program or the national program, who could really use a leg up, who could use global exposure, use a little free training, and really benefit from being plugged into this global community, because that's the real thing. Like the ILGY is going to have as one of its focuses finding all of the human capital that was created by GLXP and get them to meet each other and talk about what they're going to do next. This similarly will have that quality. There will be workshops and online events that will tie these groups together, and for select investors to run that, it's very low cost, and finding enough sponsor dollars to continue running it year in and year out should again be relatively straightforward once we get it started. And I'm pulling together a top-notch marketing and sales team so that we can routinely go out and raise money that's sufficient to support these kinds of activities. But the trick behind the Spanish one is Spain, Chile, Peru, Mexico is trying to build up their aerospace program. They've got like 100 aerospace companies, and it's an actual national goal to do more and more aerospace. So again, maybe not the chief Mexican university, but there probably is a second-tier Mexican university that would really benefit from a little bit of exposure. And then I put in Cuba there because, again, we might want to do some political grenade throwing just for fun. But the idea of the Spanish-speaking world is one of the requirements they would have is we're going to go and give you this hardware and software. You need to rewrite all of the documentation in Spanish. You need to redo all of the YouTube videos in Spanish. And now, 6 months later, we've got the whole program repeated in Spanish. And now CubeSats become accessible to the Spanish-speaking world. Africa don't get the same language trick because they have many, many different languages in Africa, but I can imagine Kenya, South America. Again, you pick about 5 different locales with growing technology industries, growing economies that would benefit from the exposure to the space. And then the idea of getting their flag in orbit. Like I said, these are probably going to be 1U cubes that will be launched off of ISS or somewhere like that. But for these countries, that'll be a big deal. Again, in India, we can probably find 5 different locales within India, not Bangalore, that have technical programs that could benefit from this. Eastern Europe, Prague, Latvia, Lithuania, all of those have burgeoning technological programs wanting to really join the first world. There are several of them that could use some help or use some exposure. Asia is kind of an interesting case. There we might do it the exact opposite. We might go to Seoul and Taiwan and Hong Kong, kind of like the Merritt Island experiment. Of course they could pay for it themselves, but because their high school kids are playing with our hardware, their multi-million-dollar parents will know about us too. And so that could be actually turn the whole model on its head, is that what we're actually trying to get aware of is the industrial base and the capital of Asia to be interested in CubeSats and eventually lunar cubes. So the idea is you go out and probably you raise, like I said, in round numbers, I'd say let's raise $250,000 for each group. Cost about $100,000 to set it up and run it. We have some extra money for other things. And at the end of 3 years, one of the things that again, is really difficult, and I talked to the guys, one of the Arduino-based CubeSats we're going to work with is going to be here on Friday, Infinity Aerospace. They're saying, yeah, the Arduino kit costs $2,500, so lots of high schools could do that, but then they build their CubeSat and now they need $50,000 or $100,000 to go get it launched, and they can't figure that one out. But you can solve that. You say, okay, well, great. Not everybody's going to fly. We're going to give everybody a kit. We're going to give everybody support. We're not going to guarantee everybody a flight, but for each group of 5, we'll run a competition, and in the context of that competition, we'll raise the money needed to fly, and one of them will win and fly based on the money we raised by running the competition between the 5, and then the other 4 will participate in the mission as well, and then repeat, rinse and repeat. And so we can create, after a couple of rounds of this, within, say, 3 to 5 years, we really will have a global community from these middle-tier economies who have every right to be in deep space as humans, and this will give them the ability to really play where we want to play again, and most of us, or many of us, have been playing for years. And so this, I think, is a way to really reach out and create that international global community that was part of the concept behind the lunar initiatives in the first place. And so then that ends that. So that's the so the 3 things to just recap is the International Lunar Geophysical Year, which is 3 conferences that highlight 18 months worth of activity. We have Cubes to the Moon, which starts off with this little 2 sets of CubeSats, and the idea is kind of what's the simplest thing we can do to get something to fly in, say, 2 or 3 years, and then it grows into a more robust program over time. And then we have Cubes to the World, where we're pushing out the concept of CubeSats, the concept of aerospace engineering as a training mechanism. It's like you go back to these platforms. One of the reasons, let's talk about why these. The CubeSat standard is because it's already there, and everybody knows what it is, and it's quite simple. Arduino, a lot of people, a lot of makers, a lot of professional amateurs use Arduino and love it, so it's got a name, it's got recognition. Atmel's behind the chips. They might throw in a bunch of money to help us promote Arduino around the world as a potential space technology. And again, a lot of people already know it, especially in third world countries. It's the kind of technology that is accessible to them. Similarly, any with it or modern engineering university is going to be teaching how do you write apps. How do you write apps for the iPhone, and how do you write apps for the Android? And we allow their EE students and their science students the opportunity to learn how to write Android apps that are actually going to go into lunar orbit. So these standards are picked as much for their PR value and their ability to attract the audience who's going to be buying the little what's in your square bonuses, because we'll do the same thing for the 1U cubes. They're only going to low Earth orbit, and so you'll sell them for a lot less than the lunar ones, but giving a Kenyan university a little CubeSat that has the picture of 1,000 well-wishers who paid for their program would be a pretty nice bonus. I think there are plenty of people who pay $100, $200 to be part of that. And with that, you can raise $100,000, $200,000, and that's more than enough to pay for the program. So those are the 3 kind of newish lunar initiatives, and the thing that I'm going to be focusing on. So for me, the next 2 or 3 years is going to be all about raising this kind of money, creating these kinds of organizations, really focusing on that. The lunar workshops are far enough down the road that in terms of science and technology, for us, the cutting edge folks, we're on our way. So I'm not going to be deeply involved in leading and organizing lunar workshops anymore. I'm going to be doing this piece, which is more kind of business and PR stuff. But I believe that with this, I literally can raise a few $1 million over a few years, which will allow us to run these workshops, will allow us to attract sponsors to these workshops, and allow us to bring and build not only this global audience of new guys and the future, but even get some of us old guys some money to play with and the ability to get some stuff on the moon a lot sooner rather than later. So back to what's my win. We're all supposed to be doing wins. And so what I need next for these things is partners, and we've got lots of doing them. DSI is going to be a partner. You're going to be involved in this. Planetary Systems is going to be partnering with us. Initially, these partnerships are, this is what we're working on, and then once we have some money to work with, there will be, you know, paid pieces, but a lot of trade promotion for everybody. Participants, the workshops and all these programs, I'd like people to show up. You know, we've got about 50 or so people here. I'd like to see this workshop grow to be about 100, 150. I don't want these to be terribly big, but I definitely like them to be 100, 150 folks. I think we can have really exciting, intimate workshops like this, even with that large of an audience. And so I want to grow the participants level, and then we'll be looking for sponsors, people to be buying, you know, expo booths and sponsorships and growing that visibility as we grow our community. So that's what I've been up to. That's what I'm up to next. And thanks for your attention. Bonnie, you want to grab a mic and see if there are any questions?
Hi, this is Eric. Let's see, one top-level kind of comment. My brain has a hard time tracking 5 or 7 parallel initiatives, let alone 14. So, so that's you might want to consolidate. I don't know. Yeah. That's a top-level comment. But another suggestion is that instead of picking the cities for the 3 conferences, you know, I like the idea that it's spread around the world, but if you can marshal the enough cooperation early on, you might be able to get locations to bid to host the conference.
Yes, thank you for that. And both comments are very appropriate and on the point. The cities are kind of notional right now, and in the real world, as we get a little farther down the road, they will be kind of computed, and I'll be asking around. We've got, you know, for the European one, I was in London last year presenting, and so we have several people in Europe who said they'd love to do this if I do it. And so, and I'll ask who wants to do it, and does it end up in Berlin or London or Florence or wherever we end up? And then do we start in Europe or do we start in Asia? All of that in the real world is kind of up for grabs yet. So that's, yeah, that's because you want to create that competition. That's half of the publicity, is being able to talk about where are we going to go and who wants to play. The other piece of all the initiatives, I understand it is a bit of a blur, but another feature of the way I design things is all of them are designed so that I get a lot of value by saying I'm working on them. But like the Lunar Challenges, nobody but me is going to know if it doesn't start for 3 years. We'll be able to talk about it. We'll be able to talk about the idea of it. And when a critical mass of people show up to do it, I pull together a team. And then I'm not doing this. I'm creating teams to go get it done. Each of these has a distinct team of people. So like the workshops, these guys can run the 3 workshop series for the rest of our lives. We probably want to add, you know, a few more hands to the group. But fundamentally, this team can run the workshop. So that's come done. I show up and give some leadership and fancy talks, but that track is now self-sustaining. And then each of them has that quality where I spend a couple of years creating the vision, creating the team, creating the direction, and then once it gets going, it becomes self-sustaining, and I can step back and work on the next initiative. And So most people don't really see them all at once. Most people are going to end up encountering these things. Either they're playing on the Kickstarter and say, oh, look, cubes for the world, that's cool. Or they're going to be scientists and engineers like you guys, and you're going to learn about the workshops, which are the technical end. So most people aren't going to experience the whole flurry all at once. That's my personal hell.
Let me give you one more comment.
Please.
I'm on the faculty of International Space University, and in 2011, one of the team projects was sponsored by the UN Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space for making CubeSats for countries around the world, a handbook to be distributed. And so there was, 30 nations worth of students working on this design, and a lot of information distributed through the COSPAS with 50 or 60 countries involved and things like that. So anyway, there is a lot of international interest, and so we can tap on that.
Absolutely, I really appreciate that. So yeah, definitely get a hold of me and let's talk more about that, because I definitely, our whole thing is collaboration. I want to work with everybody who's already doing more or less what I'm doing or what I think is interesting. It's like I didn't know DSI was actually already had the modular pod idea until today, but I'm more than happy to jump in the pool with them and say, we're headed in the same direction, let's work together. ISU is somebody I've been wanting to talk to. We've been talking to Singularity, and we've been talking to MoonX. And so they are on the list. And for ISU, it's a question to you. The thing that I think ISU should be talking about, and I haven't looked carefully and I haven't really seen it in the few things I have seen, but part of what this is all about is the disintermediation of aerospace and the democratization of space. So you don't need billion-dollar companies anymore to go to space. And in fact, probably small teams like DSI of 10, 20 people with a little bit of backing growing to a few hundred at the most can probably outperform Boeing for a long time. And I just out of curiosity, is ISU talking that way these days?
Yeah, they occasionally ISU will get interested in making its own small satellite. It's the programs, either the summer program or the master's program, don't exactly lend themselves to this, but a lot of the participants have experience in this and are bringing their own activity and then going back. And so it's the alumni are now up to 3,000, and in fact, representatives of the top of lots of aerospace engines, like the head of the Chinese space program is an ISU alum and things like that. So it's there's a lot of activity that's conducted through the ISU network that for small sats. But this example was I think the people that worked on it also turned into a commercial handbook that they just issued last month. I've probably seen some of those things about design guide for small sats.
Yep, thank you for that. Anyone else? Thoughts, questions? All right, then. I think it's been a long day, a good night, and thank you for your time. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you, Russell.